Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Pour and Tell. I'm your host, John, the cigar surgeon, here as always with my co-host, Jiunn. Jiunn, what's going on, brother?
What's going on? This is a great Saturday morning. My weather is a lot better than your shitty weather over there.
Although it is pushing into the 70 degrees today, so I can actually, have a drink, enjoy some
Oh,
patio weather. I just got back from Ireland, so I'm a little wackadoodle. So if some of my words seem a little jumbled, it's because I don't know what day it is, I don't know what time it is. But of course, that means that I'm going to be talking a lot about Irish whiskey, Irish beer. So if you like Ireland, if you like the releases, this is the episode for you. So I'm just going to
nice.
jump right in if that's cool with you.
Let's do it.
All right, so I'll get it out of the way kind of first before I get into the whiskey talk. Guinness, everyone talks about how Guinness tastes better in Ireland. It does taste better in Ireland. There's no question. I don't think it's a subjective thing. I don't think it's you're on vacation. It's great. It absolutely 100% tastes better, tastes different. The beer is, to me, if Guinness tastes like that here, I would drink so much Guinness, it wouldn't even be funny. It's just a completely better, different beer, period.
Is it differently? Is it different made or different ingredients?
I think what it is that because they take it directly from the brewery to the bar, they do the nitro infusion at every single pub there, whether it's the UK, whether it's Ireland. You get a fresh, super crazy fresh Guinness that is nitro right there instead of having a widget in the can. And I think not sitting in a can, not being on the boat across the ocean, it just ends up being a completely different beer, and I think it's fantastic.
Oh,
So yeah, so everyone can fight me in real life if you disagree. You can message me and comment. I don't care, but yeah. So talking more about beer, so I managed, because of course I am a beer head. I love beer, so I went out of my way to try and find local beer there. And there is a burgeoning, growing Irish craft beer industry. There was two companies that I kind of focused on. One was Porterhouse Brew. They have a brew pub there, which was really awesome. The bartender probably thought I was an alcoholic because he was like, "Man, you're drinking some heavy stuff," and I'm like, "I'm gonna make my way through your entire menu if I can. I don't care." And I think he was a little intimidated by that. The other one was Urban Brewing, and they're kind of a small craft brewery. They do a brew pub, and they have some really funky stuff. So I'll just kind of make my way quickly through the Porterhouse. So what I was able to do, I wanted to try their barrel aged stuff, but it was like 11.2%, and I kind of wanted to make it through the tasting session without blowing my palate out. So I started out kind of in the wrong direction. I went with a celebration stout, very stouty, not like Guinness. I think the style is very sort of typical to what I would expect a big coffee stout in the States to be like. And I thought it was great. It was very, very well balanced. It had, that big coffee flavor without being overpowering the palate. It had the nice toasted malts without being overpowering the palate. I would have given that beer a good mid sixes on the DP scale. So completely radically on my second beer, I went with the Yippa IPA. And I would say it was a very good example of an East Coast IPA. Like if I didn't know any better, if I was blind tasting that, I would say that came out of New York or somewhere on the East Coast. So had lots of body, wasn't thin, wasn't astringent, wasn't tannic. Very good. And then I finished it up with and I apologize to all the Irish speakers out there. I'm going to probably massacre this, but it's an Anbrain Blasta. Anbrain Blasta, which is Irish for a brown ale. Bran
oh,
is brown, Blasta is ale, I guess. Anyways,
oh.
really nice brown ale. Had some really nice malted quality to it. Again, no astringency. I find sometimes the brown ales you can get really astringent quality. Very enjoyable, very sessionable. So good overall. Happy with Porterhouse. And I realized sitting there that I've actually had a Porterhouse before here. It's made it across the pond here. I've had their oyster stout on multiple occasions. So I recognized the branding. I was like, oh man, I've had this beer before. I really like their beer. So, kind of funny. And then Urban Brewing, man, their stuff was great. So they had some really, really funky stuff. They had an oatmeal pale ale. I don't think I've ever had an oatmeal pale ale. They had a beer called the Beery Mary Lager, and I'll get into that. They had a Pilsner, which, as you know, I'm not really a Pilsner guy. I find Pilsners kind of boring. And then they had a Bergamot, Rose Bergamot Saison. funky, funky, funky. So starting at the top, the oatmeal pale ale. I'll tell you what, man. Great combination of oatmeal and pale ale. So you get that like that sort of oaty, chewy, sweet oatmeal flavor. But
Mhm.
it didn't overpower the pale ale. Like you still kind of got that pale ale freshness, crispness. It was a really nice combination. Big fan.
Oh,
The beery Mary lager. Oh man. So really, what they were going for was a Bloody Mary as a lager. Um, I would say that they nailed it, and I hated it. So you know,
well, do you like Bloody Marys in general?
I like Caesars, which is to me the superior form of a Bloody Mary.
Oh, wait,
So
what is that? What is Caesar's?
So Caesar, think of a Bloody Mary, but it's made with clam juice. So
Ugh,
no, I know it sounds weird, dude, but I'm telling you, I should bring some for you.
ugh.
It is it if you get past your head from the clam juice, it is a Bloody Mary with more body. That's the way I
Hmm.
describe it. Just imagine a Bloody Mary had a lot more body to it. And they sell like crazy up here. We call them. It's called clamato juice, so it's tomato juice and clam juice.
Hmm.
It sounds weird. It freaks people out. But I tell you, when you taste it, it is amazing. And now, again, getting back to the beer, they absolutely nailed it. It tasted like a Bloody Mary lager. It finished with Tabasco sauce. This is what happens when you fly across the pond and you're jet lagged. My wife loved it. She loved it. I hated it, but absolute props that if you're scoring based on what they're going for within the style, they
Hmm.
nailed it. They absolutely nailed it. So, if you're looking for that, the Beery Mary Lager was bang on. Exactly what they were going for. They nailed it. Um, Weirdly, of the session, the Pilsner was my favorite.
Huh.
So isn't that
Why?
funny? It had so much more body than the pilsners I'm used to. It just wasn't like, yeah, it's a beer and it's crisp and blah blah blah. It's refreshing, but there's no flavor characteristics to it other than beer. It had so much body to it. It was so rich. It was so satisfying, and it had such a great mouthfeel. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. It was by far my favorite. And then I think the most interesting one was the Rose Bergamot Saison. Um, I don't know if you like Bergamot um, tea. I think a lot of people find that flavor kind of off-putting.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not a fan
Not a fan. Okay.
at all. Actually, yeah.
So it was a nice combination. It was very balanced with the Saison. Like Saisons have that really nice farmhouse funk. I like that. A lot of people, again, Saisons can be pretty. I don't know. A lot of people either hate them or love them. I like
Yeah,
Saison. Go
most
ahead.
people hate them because the main thing I hear about when people say they hate it is because there's too much funk,
Yeah,
right? And
they're
with
funky.
funk means people don't like that horse blanket barnyardy aspect of it.
True, man. It's like dirty sock. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is. Yeah, it's funky, and I like it. I love it, and it was a great combination. The Bergamot added this other dimension to the saison, so you got that plus the funk plus the saison. It was my second favorite, hands down. Really, really enjoyed it. Um, Now I'm trying to because I have so much to go through for Ireland, so I'm trying to do my best to go through this. So I'm not going to go too deep on the Teeling whiskey. So I'm wearing. We had a
Oh,
lot
hold
of
on.
whiskey.
Before you talk
Oh,
about
go ahead.
Teeling, so I have a couple of thoughts within your beer experience over there in Ireland. Is first of all, I had no idea that outside of America, this sounds fucking arrogant, but I don't mean to sound arrogant. I had no idea that outside of America there's all these different styles that's being brewed and provided to consumers. So I think that's super cool. I just, especially within like when I think about overall, like in Ireland and you know surrounding parts, like I mainly think about there being mainly like
Yep.
lagers, pilsners, and like brown
ESBs.
ales.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really cool, and to know that they're striking at such a like high caliber of good taste, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and secondly, I think I'm going to try to go search out for some of this stuff at my local shops. I probably okay. Let's just say I never go to the international importer sections, um, because there's so much good stuff that's locally available.
Yeah. Like we were talking last
Uh,
episode.
yeah, for sure. So, but this encouraged me to go check out if I could even score some of these and try it out in the stateside myself.
Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to get any of the urban brewing because I don't know whether they export or not, but I can tell you that the Porterhouse Brew stuff is available in Canada. So if it's available in Canada, it's absolutely available in the States. No question. Yeah.
Cool.
Good stuff. So Teeling whiskey. So I'm actually, so we went to a number of distilleries. Of course, we did Jameson. Jameson is Jameson. I'm not going to talk about Jameson. We'll talk about it in another episode. Did Teeling. Teeling is one of my favorite whiskey, Irish whiskeys out there. Didn't do a lot of Bushmills because unfortunately we didn't have the time to visit Bushmills. We also went to Liberties. Little craft. Picked up the shirt. It's super cool. It was the most hipster, and I say that with all love, it was the most hipster distillery I've ever been to. When you walk into a distillery, this is what my wife said. She says, you're in a hipster place when you walk through the doors and there's a huge banner on the front inside that says, welcome to hell.
What?
Yeah, they're kind of they're just that alternative hipster, cool, shake up traditional whiskey, mentality, that corporate suit mentality. It was a fun place. I went through a lot of the range there. Really enjoyed the whiskey. Didn't find anything that justified me bringing a bottle back and risking the wrath of my wife, but I really enjoyed the whiskey. Jameson is Jameson, as I already mentioned. But Teeling, this is my boy is Teeling. Now I'm not, again, we got a lot to go through today, so I'm going to try and keep it brief, but I did try a ton of whiskeys at the whiskey bar as well. And I don't have the notes here because I had a lot of whiskeys and that's what happened.
What is that like? Is it mainly shelf-spaced Irish whiskey?
They had everything. This whiskey bar had everything. You could have Japanese whiskey, you could have American bourbon, you could have Scotch whiskey. They had everything, and they had pages and pages and pages. But one of the most interesting whiskeys is they had a whiskey that was finished in Mizunara oak, Japanese Mizunara oak.
Oh.
And it was a 16-year, it wasn't cheap. Man, it was good.
Wait, an Irish whiskey finished
whiskey.
in Mizunara oak?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It was.
Wait, what brand? What distillery?
I didn't do my homework. I'm gonna have to have it for the next episode. But it was really interesting.
I've not heard about that actually.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So I'll just briefly talk about my 3 whiskeys. I'm not going to go into too much detail this week, but we did a bunch of Teeling. Like I said, I love Teeling. Ended up bringing back a ton of Teeling with us, ton of bottles. So we did the small batch, which is kind of their I don't want to say entry level, but it is. I mean, it was like 40 euros entry level whiskey. It's a combination of continuous still whiskey with typical pot still whiskey, malted unmalted barley. It was interesting. It's a good whiskey for 40 euro. It's got a lot of funky characteristics because you get a lot of spice off the unmalted barley. It's pretty easy drinking, which is always nice. And the wife loved it. So that's, that makes it an easy sell to bring a bottle back. So big fan. Did the pot still whiskey, which is a straight pot still whiskey. Again, it was really good. That was actually my wife's favorite whiskey. We ended up not bringing a bottle back. It was around the same price as a small batch, but I wasn't really a huge fan of the pot still. I just found that the body of the whiskey was maybe a little lacking for me. Like it was a good Irish whiskey, but there wasn't enough there to sort of justify the bottle. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. And then the bottle that I'll talk a little bit about here was the single malt. I featured it the other night on Sharing Our Pairings. So if you want to see me talk, just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Search out Sharing Our Pairings. You can check that out. It is a cigar pairing show, but you can fast forward to the whiskey section. And I basically talk for, 5 minutes, 8 minutes about the whiskey. What's really interesting to me is it's finished. I think it's either 5 or 6 different casks. So American bourbon, sherry, Madeira, sauternes, white wine, port. So that I've never heard of a whiskey finished in that many different casks. But needless to say, so the single malt whiskey, so it's made from malted and unmalted barley, entirely from the stock at Teeling. and we bought it because it was really, really good. It wasn't crazy. It was like 65 euros, I think, for a bottle. So, you know, a
Oh,
little bit premium, but not crazy.
no, not at all.
Anyways, loved it. I could talk Irish whiskey all night, but I'm gonna give you a chance to talk libations because
No,
yeah.
I think I think for guys that especially as you're starting to get into whiskey, I think not just speaking about Teeling, but Irish whiskey in general is a really good way to get into whiskey
Mhm.
because it is typically incredibly palatable. And being so palatable, I think it it's very it's it doesn't burn your palate. The flavors overall doesn't overwhelm your palate. And especially something like Teeling. Like Teeling's amazing, dude. Like it's so underrated.
Yeah.
Not many people talk about it, unfortunately, or fortunately for us. And from top to bottom, Teeling has some really outstanding stuff. So
Yeah, I'm not going to go into the history of the distillery, but I'll let people know that they are a brand new distillery. They only opened in 2015. The only reason that they're able to release some of this great whiskey is because their father opened the Cooley distillery back in the early 80s, and then he sold out to Diageo, I think in I'm going to say mid 2000s. But what he did, which was very, very smart, sold the distillery, kept the stock. So he kept 16,000 casks of Cooley whiskey, which allowed them to open up Teeling and immediately have whiskey stock that they could put out
mm,
under the Teeling brand. They could obviously mix that, blend that together with Teeling whiskey as soon as they hit that 3-year mark, which is a minimum mark for Irish whiskey, and immediately come out of the gate with great, great product. And they are hands down my favorite. Now, I didn't do a shameless plug. James Fox Cigar and Whiskey store on Grafton is where I bought it because he's a good brother of the leaf. He's a cigar smoker. I know him very well from traveling to Cuba. Rob Fox is one of the owners. Super nice guy. So naturally, that's where I bought. So if you're in Dublin, you got to go to their store. That's the place to buy the whiskey. They've got an enormous selection of really, really nice whiskey, and I could have come back with 20 bottles. I would have been super happy.
mm, nice. So me getting into my libation of the week. I have one. So this is up for review. There's the written review of it that's up on developmentpalace.com. So please check it out when you guys get a chance. So this is a Kentucky bourbon. It's from Wathen's. So it's barrel proof. So the way Wathen's does their barrel proof program is they allow stores to select one full cask and then bottle that entire cask for that store. So this is absolutely single barrel as it gets at cask strength. Um, so this particular one was selected by Cask. So Cask is a local uh, beer and spirits store in San Francisco. So they've been around for a while. The guys are great. So if you're ever in San Francisco, especially within like the touristy areas of like Embarcadero, you can easily visit these guys. So this is selected by Cask. This is barrel number 19. It's a heater. It's not that much of a heater. It's 117 proof, 58.6% ABV.
Jiunn,
It's heated
just so
enough.
you know, that is a heater for the non-crazy whiskey heads. Anytime you go over 50% ABV, I mean most
Okay.
people get blown out at 96 proof. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that qualifies.
Wait, so side tangent, right? So yesterday I went to Cass actually with one of my coworkers, and she's like, "Hey, I want to buy whiskey to give to my friends to enjoy over the weekend when they're visiting San Francisco." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I was like, "Well, I was like, well, what do they typically like drinking?" And then she goes, "They like Hennessy." And I was like, "Okay, that is not whiskey." But if you wanted to get whiskey, I was like, "What kind of flavors do they like?" Right? They're like, yeah. They're like, well, they like drinking old fashioned. So I was like, okay. So I immediately thought, okay, sweet whiskey booziness, right? And then I started recommending all this stuff. And then I was looking at certain bottles, and I was like, you know what, this is pretty good. Like, especially at 120 proof, like the flavors really showed through. And then I stopped myself, and I was like, wait a minute, these guys don't really drink whiskey.
No,
They're gonna fucking hate me
it's gonna
for
taste like
recommending.
rocket fuel to them because their palate isn't gonna be at all prepared for that. You're gonna kill them.
Uh, but anyways, back to this whiskey. So this Wathen's barrel pick, I ultimately landed at a 6.08, which is on the lower end of good spectrum, right? So it's like highly average, lowly good, if that makes sense. So you know, I overall thought it was average, and the reason I thought that is this. So I was very torn reviewing this actually. It's very unique and interesting bourbon. It's unique and off the beaten path because this bourbon green mint this slightly oily, buttery aspect to it, and it was very nutty, which typically within those flavors it doesn't really show up in bourbon, right? So bourbon is typically amount of caramel, toffee, vanilla, oak, etc. And it had those, but it was more of those like minty, buttery aspect of it. So the main reason I ultimately landed at, it was ultimately average because um, I felt like it had too much of a raw oak influence, and it was especially on that balance and finish. It was too overpowering to have such an oak influence with that inner sea mintiness. And it's not cheap for bourbon. This is about $85.
Oh yeah, it's definitely into the
Fine.
premium range.
Yeah, this is definitely premium bourbon. So my ultimate recommendation is if you want to try a unique bourbon, go after something like a Wathen's barrel pick. But if you are into the traditional bourbon of that big caramel, toffee, vanilla, oakiness, and that Kentucky chew, this is not it. So yeah, I guess I'm still happy to own this bottle because it is very unique, but I'm not going to be searching out for more of it.
Cool. Well, sorry to dominate the what you're drinking this week because obviously I had a lot to catch up on in Ireland and I could have gone on for 45 minutes, no problem. But yeah,
No, man, you had some. I'm jealous. I wish I was you,
it was
man.
good. It was good. So we got some kind of interesting libation news this week. One of the ones that's kind of near and dear to my heart is Scotland, which is not necessarily known for making substantial changes to the rules of what is Scotch whiskey. And it's important people understand that every different area, so whether it's bourbon, American whiskey, whether it's Irish whiskey, whether it's Scotch whiskey, they have limitations, rules, and they're quite strict about what is required to make whiskey. And I'm not going to go into the Scotch whiskey rules because they're complex a little bit, and we'll talk about that in a future episode. But I will say that one of the things that they are quite restricted on is the type of barrels they can use. Now, most whiskey manufacturing anywhere in the world uses ex-bourbon barrels because in American whiskey, you can only use a bourbon barrel once. It has to be American oak, and then they have a market for it. And that market is all the whiskey manufacturers in the world buy those barrels from them and then use them to age Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey, Japanese whiskey in. That's most of it. Now, obviously, we've talked about whiskey being in Sauterne cask. We've talked about whiskey being in port. That's all fine. You can even do rum cask. However, there are limitations. So Scotland has decided to lift some of those limitations. They're allowing a wider variety of casks. This news comes to us by scotchwhiskey.com. So they're changing the law. So now you can add different barrels for maturation. So you could use an ex-tequila barrel. I don't know how I feel about that, but it's interesting. They've got a Calvados cask. Now, I don't know what Calvados is. I didn't do my research to find out what Calvados is, so but it's interesting. So just quickly get into it. So the exceptions previously were you couldn't use any kind of barrel which was from stone fruits. Couldn't use any barrel that was from that had a flavoring or a sweetener in it. So now they've basically amended the rules. They've amended. Well, Jiunn, you want to talk about Calvados? Go for it, brother. You
Yes.
know what's up.
Calvados. It's a apple pear brandy from France. So basically, the way I view this is it's going to impart a lot of. I hope a lot of like that stone fruit, that jamminess, that ripeness and quality into the whiskey. So that's kind of how I think about it in terms of what it may taste like in
Nice.
whiskey.
Thank you for that. So some examples of some of the barrels that they'll be able to use now with these limitations being lifted, and like Jiunn was saying, it's going to impart interesting flavors. which is kind of the whole point of barrel aging. So you've got agave spirits, which includes tequila, mezcal. I'm not sure if I'm stoked about tequila, but agave spirits would be really interesting. If you've had a good agave spirit of mezcal, it is interesting. It's very different than the gut rot tequila you've had. Calvados, which Jiunn explained. Barrel-aged cachaça, which I believe is from Brazil. Shochu and baijiu, which is interesting. So you start to get into...
Oh, what?
No, you're not. You're like...
What the fuck? Okay, so keep going. I have my
All right.
take on.
And then
this.
Obviously fruit spirits. So any kind of fruit ale, with fruit port, that kind of things that do have that flavoring. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, you still can't use an ex-cider cask, even though, as they comment in the article, Glen Moray kind of used a cider cask on the DL in sort of a skirting the rules method. But that's kind of cool. So now, you're going to see a bit of an expansion of people trying different things. I'm sure tequila and agave is probably going to be the one that they start with. But, it's cool. It's interesting to me. What are your thoughts?
I don't know how I feel about these second, third, subsequent maturations and these different casks. I think so. At one point, in one of the episodes, we talked about how we both unanimously really enjoy sherry cask whiskeys, right?
Forget about it.
Because we naturally really enjoy that fruity quality of it, stew fruit aspect. Things. Sometimes it could downright taste like freaking fruit cobblers, right? And it's really good. But we also talked about how you can sometimes mask kind of shitty whiskey with second and third maturations in different barrels. So I think on that front, I still have a heart out for like kind of that single stay, single malt, single barrel aspect of whiskey. And I think that is the purest form you could get. But we're also in a new age in which it's like, hey, there's all these barrels out there. Let's experiment and see what kind of flavors we could bring. And I've had, especially in the bourbon world, some amazing whiskeys that has second, third maturations in different types of barrels. But is it whiskey? Is it truly the traditional whiskey? Absolutely not. I don't know. I feel torn about it, and especially when I think about like baijiu, which is a lot of it is from China. That shit is disgusting. I'm sorry. I'm Asian. I can say it. I don't give a fuck. So,
now I will tell you that obviously the Scotch whiskey industry disagrees with you. It is firmly Scotch whiskey according to the rules now.
I think I don't know, man. I shift more of the thought of that's too much flexibility. You're losing the core of what I feel like Scotch whiskey is. And what is Scotch whiskey? I don't exactly know how to pinpoint it, but I do know it shouldn't be that flexible.
All right. There we go.
What do you think?
I don't really care. I think that if it's good, it's good, and if it's bad, it's bad, and that might be undersimplification. But what I mean by that is I'm not going to buy it, and I think it'll, not to be like the market's going to solve every problems, but what I would say is that if it's not good, then other distilleries won't experiment with that cask, and it'll kind of sort itself out. Like with baijiu,
True.
if they're like, "Oh my god, the whiskey tastes like fermented asshole," then people are going to be like, "This is disgusting," and the industry won't use it. But I like that they can experiment with that, and they can maybe they only do a month in a baijiu cask, but it gives it a characteristic that you wouldn't expect. You know what I mean? So I'm all for experimentation. Sure. I think if they can give a little bit of freedom to them to use different casks, it might bring the cost of some whiskey maturation down. So the bottle price might drop. I don't know, man. Try it. If it's good, it's good. If it's not, it's not. And we'll find out soon. Relatively soon, anyways. In other whiskey news, we do a lot of whiskey news, but we do beer news. We're talking about how there's this resurgence of Irish whiskey. We talked in the last episode. I talked in this episode. There's now a 5th distillery opening up in Ireland, in Dublin. So there is kind of this resurgence of Irish whiskey. This news comes to us by ScotchWhiskey.com. So Irish whiskey company Rowan Company is going to open a €25 million urban distillery in the former Guinness power station at St. James Gate in Dublin. This is in the this is in the Dublin Liberties district. This is where Teeling is located. This is where the Dublin Liberties whiskey distillery is located. They're typically, now interestingly enough, they're not just going to do triple distilled single malt. They said they're going to do double distilled single malt. So that's a departure from traditional Irish maturation, which is really defined by, or has been defined in the past by, triple distillation. They say that it's going to give them some flexibility to experiment with the mash bills. They're going to do single pot whiskey. The only sad thing is it's owned by Diageo.
No wonder.
Yeah,
25 million.
25 million euro, man. Yeah. So, but you know what? Official opening is on June 21st. So that's kind of cool. They're going to have a really fun and experimental visitor center, which I think I'm all for. Obviously, they can't start producing spirit, they can't release spirit for 3 years, but they say they're going to be able to produce 500,000 liters of spirit per year, science liters, which I think works out to, that's probably, I think, just over or just under 100,000 freedom gallons. But man, it's exciting. The 5th distillery in Ireland, and I didn't really mention this at the top of the show, but Teeling was the first Irish whiskey distiller to return to Dublin in 125 years. So,
wow.
In a very short period of time, because that was 2015. So in a very short period of time, you've got 5 distilleries. We could be seeing the resurgence of Irish whiskey around the world. And you know what? Again, we talked about it. More whiskey is better, man. I'm all for it. Bring it on.
All good signs, regardless if it's Diageo or not.
Boo, Diageo, boo.
Ooh, fuck those guys. No, I'm just kidding.
Don't sue us. Don't sue us, please. Last but not least, this is kind of more of a fun show item. It popped up on my list from a website called ink.com from a guy called Jeff Hayden, and he kind of talks about the amount of alcohol that's being drank in the States. So I'll just kind of break down the stats and we can chat about it briefly. But basically, they talk about the survey of alcohol consumption that was done by the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. The survey itself is a little boring. He kind of broke down the highlights, which was really nice. So breaks down like this. The bottom 3 deciles, the bottom 30% of Americans don't drink at all. Which, might be higher than I think. Only 30, that might be either higher or lower, I'm not sure, but 30% of Americans say they don't drink at all. The 4th decile, so the next point up, drink only 0.02 drinks per week. So
0.02 drinks per week.
So really, you're talking like maybe a beer a year. Like maybe they only drink a celebratory on their birthday. Maybe it's like they have a champagne at New Year's. So, really I would classify that pretty much as a non-drinker, right? Like you're essentially almost never drinking.
Basically.
Yeah. Now the 5th decile, so this is kind of what you consider the majority of your drinkers-ish. They don't drink much more. They only drink about 7 drinks a year, roughly. So 0.14 drinks per week. So again, I would kind of classify that as maybe people are only drinking at a social occasion, like a work thing, maybe a holiday thing. So, or maybe it's just a glass of wine at Thanksgiving, Christmas kind of thing. So you're talking like a pretty significant percentage of Americans really don't drink. Now this kind of leads us into the more funny, exciting part. So the 6th decile of consumer drinks about 0.63 drinks per week. Now I would kind of consider this to be the sort of average American. So they drink about a half a drink a week is how it works out, or 32 drinks a year. So you think about like basically a beer every 2 weeks, roughly. And that whole, what I just went through, that's 60% of all Americans aged 18 or over. So you would say in a bundle, 60.
That seems so low.
Right? So, and
it's
going to make sense when I get into the real decile. And it's going to get interesting. I tell you, it's going to get really funny. So 60% of Americans roughly drink a half a drink or less per week. So I would have assumed that would be higher, but way higher. Now here's where we get funny. So we talk about the alcoholics among us. So the 7th decile of group, so this is the next 40%, okay? They drink about 2.17 drinks per week. So now you've gone from 0.63 drinks per week to to 2.17 drinks per week. So it's like, that's a big jump. So you're talking about guys and ladies are drinking roughly 2.25 drinks per week. That is not really where I am. I'm probably between the 7th and 8th decile, but to me, that's a pretty significant jump, right?
Big jump. Now we're getting to this makes more sense to us.
Now wait, because
enthusiasts.
Yeah, so here's where it gets really interesting. The next decile, the 8th decile, consumes 6.25 drinks per week. So essentially
6.25, that's a lot, dude. I don't even drink that much.
So these are basically people who come home and they have a glass of wine or a beer every day, pretty much every day per week. And this is the top 30% of alcohol consumption in the world, in the States. So now, interestingly enough, the Surgeon General and a bunch of other scientists say that 1 drink a day is really not that much. They say that the health experts say that a glass of red wine a day, a beer a day is actually not that much. So it seems like a much when you break it into, a drink every day. Doesn't seem like that much. Now, top 20% of alcohol consumers in the United States, okay, drink 15.25 drinks per week.
Holy shit.
15.25 drinks per week. This is I said top 20%. I think it's actually top 10%. So they drink 15.25 drinks per week.
Wow.
Right?
That is, I don't know, man. That seems like, so you were basically saying from 8th to 9th decile, it doubles.
It doubles.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit
more than doubles. Yeah. So you're talking that these people are having 2 drinks or more per day, every day, for 365 days a year.
So let's so I'm going to try to practically quantify this. So let's say you come home after work, before dinner, you have like a 7% IPA, which is fair, right? 6.5 to 8% IPA, right? You have 12 ounces of that. You're feeling it before you eat dinner.
I'd say it's reasonable to say that you're probably mildly intoxicated.
Okay, or the flip side of that, which I think most, let's just say, Americans do, is they drink a glass of wine,
Yes.
a glass of red wine, right? 12 to 15%.
Yeah.
Okay, you're feeling it. Now, to say from the 8th decile of you doing that to the 9th decile of you doing twice as amount of that, you're like really feeling it, man. You're like, man, I'm getting a little shitty. It's time to eat. Give me my French toast. You know what I mean?
Now, here's the interesting thing, Jiunn. I'm not done.
Okay, all right.
So this was the top 20. That was the top 20% of alcohol consumers in the United States. Let's talk about the top 10% of alcohol consumers in the United States. Do you want to guess how many drinks per week that they consume?
30.
You'd be way off. They consume 73.85 drinks per week. So that works out to 10 drinks a day, or roughly 2 bottles of wine per night.
Oh my God.
7 days a week, 365 days a year. That essentially works out to a 12-pack of beer every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Dude.
The top 10% of drinkers in the United States account for more than half of all alcohol consumed in the United States. Right? I mean, I know it was a slow burn to get to that point. The top 10% of drinkers are consuming more than half of all the alcohol in the United States, 73.85 drinks per week.
So the industry. So I think with that said, I can make a assumption in saying the wine and spirits industry, beer, wine and spirits industry, relies on some heavy alcoholics.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the 9th decile was kind of getting into a little concerning alcohol consumption rate. I think that it's fair to say at the 10th decile range, if you're drinking 73.85 drinks a week, you are a functional alcoholic. Like I don't want to throw shade at anybody, but if you're consuming 2 bottles of wine a night, Like you think about how much money that is. Like a 12 pack. Like what does a 12 pack cost in the States? Like what, 10, $12?
Yeah, something like that, like of like Bud Light or something.
So you're spending roughly $100 or $110 a week on beer,
Yeah,
close to $450 a month.
and I assume that when you are in that position, that I don't know, like I used to have functioning alcoholic. I wouldn't be able to function. Like
No,
I wouldn't even
are
be
you
able. I
kidding me?
probably would lose my job.
2 bottles of wine,
Yeah.
dude. I
Oh
can handle
man.
my booze, but 2 bottles of wine, I wouldn't be able to function. I mean, we're talking the previous decile being 2 drinks a day. If I was drinking 2 drinks a day every single day, I think my wife would probably come to me and say we need to talk about your alcohol consumption.
Yeah, I would hope she
Yeah,
does.
yeah, and that would only
I mean,
put me in. Yeah, yeah.
like I used to like this is maybe like 7 8 years ago when I was having some really dark days at my job. I came home and I had a bottle of wine a night, and I probably did this for like 4 or 5 months, and then ultimately I realized that uh, I was constantly sluggish. Well, no shit, right? Like no way. And I'm a pretty heavy drinker, like within overall, within the landscape of Americans. Uh, so man, that's incredible
So
statistics.
here's some math statistics in terms of how that affects the industry, and I'm assuming that those top 10% of drinkers are not consuming boutique spirits and boutique beer. They're consuming,
Sure.
mainstream, cheap, inexpensive stuff. But if
Yeah.
the top, that 10th decile, were to reduce their consumption down to the 9th decile, which is still a concerning amount of consumption, that would
Hmm.
reduce the total overall consumption of ethanol or alcohol in the United States by 60%.
Dang.
So those top 20 to 30%, so the 9th decile, 10th decile, 8th
Hmm.
decile, they generate 70 to 80% of overall sales for an average alcoholic product.
That's
Isn't
wild.
that crazy? I mean,
That's how.
yeah.
That's sad.
It's a little sad. I know, like I said, hopefully everyone was entertained by that. I was blown away. I found the first half of that to be not that interesting, but I felt it was important to go through that to really set up the 73 drinks a week, which is just absolutely
Crazy.
mind-boggling to me. I can't even fathom that it's not just a handful of people. You're talking the top 10% of the population of the United States is consuming that much alcohol.
Shit, dude. Wow, that's wild.
Yeah. So needless to
Mm.
say, you know, we want people to consume alcohol responsibly. I know we talk about going on benders here in terms of, to a whiskey tasting or whatever, but we do want people to be responsible. I think if you're consuming 73 drinks a week, you probably should be seeking help because that's a little concerning, a little bit.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
So hopefully everyone's been heavily entertained as I was. It sounded like you had a good laugh at that.
Dude.
That kind of wraps us up for this week of Pour and Tell episode 7. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. We'll have a lot to talk about. You have any closing thoughts for this episode?
No, I think as we trying to get out of our pilot stage of doing this show, yeah, it's if you guys have any questions, let us know. If I could give you feedback, or if you could give you questions, especially if you're stateside, more than willing to help you out. Big enthusiast of spirits and beer, not so much wine, although we do like some wine once in a while.
Absolutely.
So, so yeah, thank you guys for continuously supporting, and see you next time.
Cool. See you in 2 weeks.